Hello and welcome to another episode of the CX Files. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This is a very special edition because instead of just the usual single guest, this week we've got three guests and they're all experts on GigCX. Mahesh Raghuram is Director of Customer Service at NewAge Products. He's based in Brampton, just outside Toronto in Canada. Now, NewAge manufactures and distributes home improvement products. So if you live in Canada and you've tried getting furniture or other kind of organization systems to organize your garage or garden, then you probably know them. Vinay Gupta is a senior expert at McKinsey & Company. He's based in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, Vinay and I have had several conversations about GigCX, so I know that it's a subject he's been researching for at least the past couple of years. Terry Rybolt is the Chief Revenue Officer at LiveXchange. Terry's also based in Boston. LiveXchange offers a GigCX platform that allows companies to quickly build and staff a virtual contact center in the cloud. Now, I thought that a discussion like this could be useful because there's still a great deal of misunderstanding around GigCX in the marketplace today, even though Terry and I have written a great book about the subject, available at all good bookstores now. This is a very well-balanced panel as well. As you can see, we've got one of the leading management consulting firms. We have a company that provides a GigCX platform, and we've got a company that actually uses GigCX. So I think there's some great information in the discussion. Now, we all got on a Zoom call today, Friday, 25th of June, 2021, to explore GigCX from all of these different perspectives. Okay, so let's go straight to the GigCX edition of CX Files. Okay, it's great to get everybody together for this GigCX special discussion on CX Files. I'd really like to kick off with Vinay because, over the past year or so, we've been talking a lot about GigCX and how it's changing the industry and what are the real opportunities. So could you just introduce GigCX for the listeners? I mean, what is it? How would you define it? What's your take on what is it doing, and why is it important for variability and seasonality in customer service?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So GigCX in simple terms means meeting customer needs or demand by leveraging a much more flexible and dynamic workforce and almost in real time, right? And if I unpack customer needs, what is happening in recent time is that customers' expectations has gone up. They would like their organization or their companies to respond to their questions immediately. And it's hard to predict their behaviors because it's so variable depending on which product and which services they have bought, and which is very hard to meet with a traditional staffing model of 8 hours for 5 days. And I'll give you a few examples, right? So for example, what we are seeing based on our research, that on Monday, there's 20 to 30% more inquiries from the customer as compared to any other days. Or if you are a retail customer, or if you're a retail company, then you might see 3 to 4 times higher volume on special events like Black Friday or year-end sales. For a banking, you might see 30 to 50% more volume on days like paycheck days, middle of the month, end of the month. So there's so much going on. And on top of it, if you see, due to COVID, all the behaviors which were predictable earlier, that has completely changed. So to meet all this variability, organization would need a model which we call GigCX model, where you can easily ramp up and ramp down and dynamically meet the needs of the customers.
Okay, that's great. And so let's talk to Mahesh because you're actually using this at NewAge. It's a strategy that you've clearly bought into. But what first attracted you to the GigCX model, and how is this different from the traditional contact center?
That's a great question, and Vinay briefly touched upon that. Is one thing we wanted to introduce to our customer service model was flexibility. And more so during, we are an e-commerce company with a high average order value, which means we have massive seasonal peaks. And if you look at, say, a Black Friday kind of time frame or start of summer, companies are struggling to actually maintain their service levels. You would, Black Friday time frame, you would, if you call any contact center, you would probably wait for 30, 60 minutes. on an average. So we didn't want to go down the same path. Hence, we wanted to get into a model where it induces flexibility, but at the same time, we didn't want to get tied down by the FTE requirements through a traditional BPO model. So that was one of the main factors in terms of going with GigCX.
Okay, that's great. I mean, but where did you first hear about the model then?
So I was talking to Terry prior to, I would say, last September kind of timeframe, and we were just discussing random topics, and then I was talking about, say, solutioning for our, say, Black Friday kind of timeframe, and that's when Terry took me through the GigCX model and what flexibility it offers and how much control it offers in terms of staffing as well as quality control. That's where I've heard about it through Terry and LiveXchange, and then we were, I had to take it back to my owners of the company, and they were pleasantly happy as to how much flexibility we have, good amount of control over our staffing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Well, a fortunate conversation with Terry then. So, and now we can turn to Terry. I mean, GigCX has been possible for a long time, I suppose, Terry, but the level of attention has really exploded because of the pandemic and because of the normalization of work from home. Is there some sort of realization taking place in the market that it is better or more flexible? And why are we only seeing this attention paid now?
First off, Mark, good morning, and great to be here today and to be a part of this with a company like McKinsey and a dynamic brand like NewAge. It's great to be part of this discussion. As Vinay mentioned, when a company like McKinsey starts to pay attention to a trend like this, you know that there's a lot of momentum going on behind it. And you look at a dynamic brand like NewAge and all the things that Mahesh had mentioned, with the flexibility. The other piece of this that I really do believe is a factor is when you look at the cost advantages of this, simply from an employee model, when you're dealing with benefits and overtime and all those other factors on top of the staffing efficiencies that have already been mentioned. This is where the gig model really makes sense. There's 57 million gig workers in the US alone today. That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the model, the gig economy is here. We're just now introducing it into the customer experience space at scale. And it's an educational process. And just like it was with work from home, we're educating the marketplace as it relates to the gig model in the customer experience as well. The key thing is, as Mahesh mentioned, it's about the control. So just because these people aren't employees doesn't mean that they don't want to provide an excellent level of customer service. And from a client base, the fact that they have full control and are operating under the exact same model that they do with their own internal staff, it makes it a real win-win for all the things that have already been mentioned.
Yeah, that's interesting. And one of the things that you brought up there was around the control and the quality. And I think maybe I'd like to throw this back to Mahesh, because one of the fears I always hear from people when I'm talking about GigCX is, how do you train the agents and maintain the quality when they're only working, it's sporadically, it might only be a few hours a week that they're working for a particular brand. So how do you ensure that you've got like a consistent level of quality with your agents then?
So again, it's one of the beauties of going with GigCX, and this is my first time that I've ever experienced it, is we've all been around the traditional BPO model for a very long time, and we understand that translating the culture from one company to the other company takes a very long time. And that's where the KPIs suffer. That's where CSAT suffers the most. So with this model, apart from flexibility, the biggest selling point for my organization was around the control of our CSRs. So we hire them, we go through the interview process, we train them, we do the QAs. So we've got full control over them. And it's when you have that kind of control, it's up to you. How do you introduce your culture to the GigCX employees? So for example, I do contact center manager does meet and greets on day one. We include them in all of our monthly meetings, town halls and stuff like that. So we make sure we include them as a part of our organization, even though they're not. It gives that culture transferability a much more faster process. So in this case, what we've seen is traditionally when we hire people, we've seen say 90 days to 120 days for them to be a fully productive agent. But in this model, what we've seen is we were able to get a GigCX employee to be fully productive within 4 to 6 weeks. And that's a massive 6-week advantage for us.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting points there is that this is not like a complete transfer or a replication of the BPO model. You are directly hiring those agents, even though you're not essentially hiring them as employees. You are going out and choosing them and then onboarding them. Yeah, so that's very different. Vinay, I'd like to ask you something then about this idea of BPO flexibility, because when I first heard about this, it sounded like a replacement for the contact center. And yet what it actually seems to be is perhaps an augmentation. Like GigCX can fit around a traditional BPO with the contact center at the core and GigCX providing flexibility. I mean, is that how you see this? Or is it more of a replacement for an in-house contact center?
That's a very good question, Mark. I think if we take a step back, GigCX is all about meeting the needs of the customers, right? And then I don't think it is up to the BPOs or it's just up to the in-house to meet that flexibility. There could be multiple ways of doing it, right? There could be in-house call centers, similar to what Mahesh said, engaging with GigCX agents, using that flexibility and meeting the needs. There could be another scenario where I don't have time and bandwidth to do it. I might ask my BPO partners, can they provide the flexibility? So having that dynamics is really important to figure it out. Where do I find that flexibility? And from a BPO point of view, given this market is going to be very, very mature very soon, they need to ramp up their capability. So if I'm a BPO and then I don't have a flexible workforce, as a client, I might just go to another BPO. So it's equally important for BPOs to invest in this capability and bring it up to a level where they can start offering it to their clients.
So you think that it's becoming essential for BPO to kind of have a GigCX division to allow them to have that flexibility?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the term itself, GigCX, is slightly controversial. People are questioning sometimes whether it really describes what we're talking about here. I mean, Terry, I'd like to ask you, because you're providing a platform that facilitates GigCX, but the gig economy in many regions, it has negative connotations. We talk about a race to the bottom and paying people as little as possible. And, places like California, we've seen them legislate so Uber drivers have to become employees. So is there a danger that GigCX might follow a similar path to this? Or are we comparing completely different industries and employment models here?
It's a great question, and I think it is. There is clearly an evolution that's going on inside of the marketplace. I think about the days when Amazon first started shipping books all those years ago, and there was a thought process around how to do things, conduct commerce over the internet, and how that's completely evolved. Do I see changes coming in the model? Sure. But the gig economy is here to stay. I mean, when you look at it on a global basis, people want that level of flexibility. And the traditional model has always been, I'm going to schedule this person for an 8-hour block of time, and then I'm going to do a VTO of an early release if I don't have work for them to do. And that becomes very difficult for the individual to manage their own personal business. And then on the flip side of that, it's, as Vinay mentioned, well, if I've got a massive volume burst every Monday, but I'm scheduling a full-time shift across the board, well, I've got that staffing inefficiency there that somebody's got to pay for. So leveraging this is not a lift and shift, as everyone's mentioned here. It's really an augmentation to the existing model, putting them in where you need them. As it relates to the legislative piece, sure. I mean, these are things that we keep an eye on, and what we've found is that from a compensation perspective, these gig workers, at least in our model, are actually making more than if they were an employee. So that's another leverage, another benefit that these folks have on top of the flexibility that they bring to the table, that they can pick and choose their schedule whenever they want to work. I don't know if you noticed this morning, the UK courts ruled in favor of Deliveroo to say that their people were not employees, that they were independent workers because of the flexibility that they had to be able to pick their own schedules and work however, as much as they want. And this is just the evolution, and these discussions need to continue happening. But I truly believe that the gig model is here to stay.
Yeah, so we need to sort of get away from this kind of negative language and think, essentially, we need to move on from the idea of work always being an 8-hour shift, 5 days a week. And this flexibility can actually be very good for the employee as well as the employer who needs flexibility.
These companies that are mandating that people come back to the office, it's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds. One, because of you're mandating, but number two, once people sit in their cars or trains or wherever for an hour and a half one way each day, they're going to realize how much time that they don't have in their life, and it's going to continue pushing the benefits of work at home. And I really do believe that there are people that are going to say, look, I just want the flexibility to work whenever and wherever. And that's where the gig model comes in as well.
Okay. And you mentioned just then that it's not really a lift and shift. It's more of an augmentation. So Mahesh, when you brought this in, and I think you said it was like about Q3 last year, I mean, what was the process of transitioning to use GigCX? Was it just augmenting the existing processes that you had? I mean, was it fairly simple, or did this take a long time?
It was fairly simple. It just layered in perfectly on top of our existing contact center model. And we were able to get it up and running in about 2 to 3 weeks kind of time frame. The classic client move, we wait till the last minute to basically say, yeah, let's go. And it needs to be done as of yesterday. So we were definitely looking to launch for our Black Friday because we were so focused on our customer experience during that time frame. That is the biggest time of our year. And we wanted to get it done. And, Terry and his team really made everything possible to get us over the line. And to be honest, we've actually reported well over satisfactory service levels throughout the peak season. So we were answering calls well under 45 seconds from November all the way till end of January.
Was that the first time that you'd ever managed to sort of hit those targets?
Potentially, yes. At that rate and at that volume, yes.
Yeah. And that's interesting because you said, it just overlaid on the existing model. It was 2 or 3 weeks and we were up and running. I mean, Vinay, you're advising companies on the opportunities here and talking to them about how they can possibly benefit from this idea as well. I mean, what's the first thing that you say to companies that express an interest in this?
Yeah, so I think first, typically or personally, I advise my clients that they understand really what kind of variability they are dealing with, right? As I mentioned before, variability comes in a different forms. It could be Monday could look very different than Friday, or your day of the month could be very different than other days of the month, or it could be just monthly level variability, right? So having that understanding, and on top of it, which call types or which transactions are driving that variability. So first step is just to understand that. Once you understood it, then second, try to understand what part of that variability can be addressed with your existing infrastructure or with your existing workforce, right? As Terry and Mahesh was mentioning, a lot of employees are now willing to do much more dynamic workforce or be part of much more dynamic workforce. Even in recent surveys, we have also seen people are willing to go with split shifts and 10 cross 4s as compared to the traditional model. And then once you meet that needs with your existing in-house, then whatever is remaining, then you engage with the external GigCX provider to meet that need, or you ask your BPOs to meet that need. So there are multiple steps, and then everyone has to just follow these steps to arrive at an answer.
Okay.
Mark, can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
As everyone in this session realizes that when you take an individual and you say, okay, I'm going to have you work from 8 in the morning until noon, and then come back and work from 4 in the afternoon until 6, and then I need you all day Saturday and all day Sunday. Good luck trying to fill that shift, because you're trying to meet the volume schedules, the volume demands. Good luck trying to fill that shift. Where when you implement the gig model, those are the shifts that you're actually hiring for. So you're plugging them in only where you need them, and everything else remains the same. And that's the real staffing efficiency benefit, as Vinay and Mahesh have mentioned here. But, and when you force people to go into those shifts, especially in the contact center space, they quit. So that's another thing from a retention perspective that is a huge cost savings, because you're filling these shifts only when you need them, and you're having people that want to work those shifts and not forcing people to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because you've talked here about the flexibility, how you can augment the core kind of contact center system, and so you're creating the ability to handle seasonality. I mean, that's one of the key features here. But is there anything, Terry, that GigCX can do that's actually very difficult to do with a traditional contact center?
So as I was just mentioning here, when you look at split shifts or hard to staff shifts or overnight shifts, not only are they difficult to staff, but they're also really expensive to try to pay those premiums to attract the people to have that level of flexibility in a traditional model. The other part of it is just the sheer staffing challenges that are going on across the globe today, where people and let's talk specifically about the US. I mean, it's well documented the challenges that people have, companies have with bringing in labor today, and this is another thing that fits that. So it doesn't matter whether you are an in-house company that doesn't outsource or a BPO provider. Those staffing challenges are real, and this is where the gig model can help solve that challenge for you.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so let's just go to some final thoughts from everybody on what you see as the most exciting or interesting opportunity. And I'll just throw in an example myself, because I saw that Nissan has a very interesting idea where if you're interested in buying a Nissan electric vehicle, but you're unsure, you've never used an electric vehicle before, when you actually contact Nissan, they will put the call through to an existing Nissan customer who owns an electric vehicle. And on a GigCX basis, per interaction, they'll pay their customer to actually talk to a potential customer. So, that's a great way to sort of like involve your customer base in talking to potential customers. And that wouldn't work with a traditional kind of contact center environment. If you call for information and you talk to an agent who doesn't drive an EV, then, what kind of value is there in that information? So, so I see that there's not just the flexibility, but there could also be some new ideas about how you engage with customers as well. So let's go around the virtual table. Vinay, looking to the year ahead, what do you think is going to be one of the most exciting aspects of GigCX then?
Yeah, so as I said, days of predictable demand are gone. At the same time, now companies have a lot of option in terms of dynamic workforce, which were not there 5 to 10 years back, right? And then as they think about the future, getting ahead of the curve and meeting the customer needs is going to be very critical to meet those customer satisfaction level. And I think every executive in contact center environment should just learn about it more and think about how they can meet those needs as they define their future strategy in next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, great. So Mahesh, what do you see as the opportunities for the year ahead then?
There's the opportunities are massive and endless. And from a client perspective, my suggestion would be you need to be prepared to put in that work to get the best out of this model. A lot of times you just throw the ball over and say, yeah, everything's sorted out right now. That it doesn't work in any model, to be honest. So the opportunities are endless. We're exploring other avenues, not just your typical customer service call volume. We're actually looking at opportunities around different departments within our company on how do we utilize this flexible GigCX model. So from a client's perspective, there's a ton of opportunities that you can actually look into your organization. Just don't look at customer service as an avenue. Look at other opportunities within your departments and take advantage of this one, but be ready to put that work in.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Terry, it's up to you to round things off then.
I can't say it any better than what Vinay and Mahesh have mentioned here. One of the things that I believe you will be seeing become more prevalent is the ability for a client to sit down at their desk and to plug in a budget number that they want to be able to spend, and then suddenly through the marketplace and the platform, they're presented with a whole host of options from all over the world that they can pick and choose from and to select. So I might have 50 people from the US, I might have 75 people from Canada, I might have 100 from India, I might have 50 from the Philippines, and the blended rate all comes together. So they really do have that global capability inside of a gig marketplace model. I would not be surprised if you started seeing something like that coming out from companies, from a particular company coming forward.
All right, everybody, that's been a great discussion, some great ideas about GigCX, and hopefully a good explainer for people too. So thank you very much. Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people, or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.